Unit 6 Attitude and Social Cognition. Introduction. Social psychology is that branch of psychology which investigates how the behavior of individuals is affected by others and the social environment. All of us form attitudes or ways of thinking about specific topics and people. We also form impressions about persons we meet and assign causes of their behavior. Besides, our own behavior gets influenced by other behavior, that is, helping the needy and the distressed, without expecting anything in return. Many of these social behaviors seem to be simple, yet explaining the processes that are behind these behaviors is a complex matter, and pro-social behavior as explained by a social psychologist. Explaining social behavior. Social behavior is a necessary part of human life, and being social means much more than merely being in the company of others. You may recall from what you studied in class 11th that social psychology deals with all behavior that takes place in the actual, imagined, or implied presence of others. Take the simple example. If you have to memorize a poem and recite it, you may have no problem in doing this when you are by yourself. But if you have to recite this poem to an audience, your performance might get influenced because you are now in a social situation. Even imagining that people are listening to your recitation may change your performance. This is just one example that demonstrates thoughts, emotions, and behavior in complex ways. Social psychologists examine various forms of social behavior and try to explain their basis. Because of social influences, people form views or attitudes about people and about different issues in life that exist in the form of behavioral tendencies. When we meet people, we make inferences about their personal qualities. This is called impression formation. We are also interested in why people behave in the ways they do. That is, we assign causes to the behavior shown in specific social situations. This process is called attribution. This very often, impression formation and attributions are influenced by attitudes. These three processes are examples of mental activities related to the gathering and interpretation of information about the social world, collectively called social cognition. Moreover, social cognition is activated by cognitive units called schemas. Cognitive processes cannot be directly seen. They have to be inferred on the basis of externally shown behavior. There are other examples of social influence that are in the form of observable behavior. Two such examples are social felicitation, inhibition, improvement or decline in performance in the presence of others, and helping or pro-social behavior, that is, responding to others who are in need or distress. In order to understand completely how the social context influences the individual, it is necessary to study both social cognitive processes and social behavior. Social psychologists have shown that one must go beyond common sense and folk wisdom in order to explain how people observe and make sense of their own and others' diverse behaviors. Through systematic and objective observations and adopting scientific methods, it is possible to establish logical cause and effect relationship that explains social behavior. This chapter will give an account of the fundamental aspects of the topics mentioned above. We will begin with a descriptive of attitude. Nature and components of attitudes. For a few minutes, quietly, do the following mental exercise. Today, how many times did you tell yourself, in my opinion, or others may say so and so, but I feel? What will you fill in the blanks are called opinions. Now continue the exercise. How important these opinions to you. The topics of some of these opinions may be only moderately important to you. They are simple ways of thinking, and it does not matter much to you that others agree or disagree with your views. On the other hand, you may find that some other topics are extremely important to you. If someone opposes or challenges your views about these topics, you get emotional. You may have made some of these views part of your behavior. In other words, if your views are not merely thoughts but also have emotional and action components, then these views are more than opinions, they are examples of attitudes. All definitions of attitude agree that an attitude is a state of mind, a set of views or thoughts regarding some topic, which has an evaluative feature. It is accompanied by an emotional component and a tendency to act in a particular way with regard to the attitude object. The thought component is referred to as cognitive aspect. The emotional component is known as affective aspect, and the tendency to act is called behavioral. Taken together, all these three aspects have been referred to as ABC components: affective, behavioral, cognitive components of attitude. Note that attitudes themselves are not behavior, but they represent a tendency to behave or act in certain ways. They are part of cognition along with an emotional component and cannot be observed from outside. Box represents an example of attitude towards the environment, showing the relationship between the three components. Attitudes have to be distinguished from two other closely related concepts, namely beliefs and values. Beliefs refer to the cognitive component of attitudes and form the ground on which attitudes stand, such as belief in God or belief in democracy as a political ideology. Values or attitudes are beliefs that contain a should or ought aspect, such as moral or ethical values. One example of a value is the idea that one should work hard or that one should always be honest because honesty is the best policy. Values are formed when a particular belief or attitude becomes an inseparable part of the person's outlook on life. Consequently, values are difficult to change. What is the purpose served by an attitude? We find that attitudes provide background that makes it easier for a person to decide how to act in new situations. For example, our attitude towards foreigners may indirectly provide a mental layout or blueprint for the way in which we should behave whenever we meet one. In addition to the affective, cognitive, and behavioral components, attitudes also have properties. Four significant features of attitudes are valence, extremeness, simplicity or complexity, and centrality. Valence. The valence of an attitude tells us whether the attitude is positive or negative towards the attitude object. Suppose an attitude has to be expressed on a 5-point scale ranging from very bad, neutral, and good to very good. If an individual rates her or his views toward nuclear research as 4 or 5, this is clearly a positive attitude. This means that the person likes the idea of nuclear research and thinks this is something good. On the other hand, the rating is 1 or 2, the attitude is negative. This means that the person dislikes the idea of nuclear research and thinks it is something bad. We also allow for neutral attitude in this example. A neutral attitude towards nuclear research would be shown by rating 3 on the same scale. A neutral attitude would have either positive or negative valence. Extremeness. The extremeness of an attitude indicates how positive or negative an attitude is. Taking the nuclear research example given below, rating of 1 is extreme, as rating of 5. They are only in the opposite directions. Rating of 2 or 4 are less extreme. A neutral attitude, of course, is the lowest extremeness. Simplicity or complexity. This feature refers to how many attitudes there are within a broader attitude. Think of an attitude as a family containing several member attitudes. In a case of various topics such as health and world peace, people hold many attitudes instead of single attitude. An attitude system is said to be simple if it contains only one or a few attitudes, and complex if it is made up of many attitudes. Consider the example of attitude towards health and well-being. This attitude system is likely to consist of several member attitudes such as one's concept of physical and mental health, views about happiness and well-being, and beliefs about how one should achieve health and happiness. By contrast, the attitude towards a particular person is likely to consist of mainly one attitude. The multiple member attitudes within an attitude system should not be confused with 3 components described earlier. Each member attitude that belongs to an attitude system also has ABC components. Centrality. This refers to the role of a particular attitude in the attitude system. An attitude with greater centrality would influence the other attitudes in the system much more than non-central attitudes would. For example, in the attitude towards world peace, a negative attitude towards high military expenditure may be present as a core or central attitude that influences all other attitudes in the multiple attitude system. Attitude formation and change. Attitude formation. One important question that psychologists are interested in answering is how are attitudes formed? Like many other thoughts and concepts that develop and become part of our cognitive system, attitudes towards different topics, things, and people also are formed as we interact with others. However, there are specific conditions that lead to the formation of specific attitudes. In general, attitudes are learned through one's own experiences and through interaction with others. There are a few research studies that show some sort of inborn aspect of attitudes, but such genetic factor influence attitudes only indirectly, along with learning. Therefore, most social psychologists have focused on the conditions which lead to learning of attitudes. Process of attitude formation. The process and conditions of learning may be different, resulting in varying attitudes among people. Learning attitudes by association. You might have seen students often develop a liking for a particular subject because of the teacher. This is because they see many positive qualities in that teacher. These positive qualities get linked to the subject that she or he teaches and ultimately get expressed in the form of liking for the subject. In other words, a positive attitude towards the subject is learned through positive association between a teacher and a student. Learning attitudes by being rewarded or punished. If an individual is praised for showing a particular attitude, chances are high that she or he will develop the attitude further. For example, the teenager does yoganasans regularly and get the honor of being Miss Good Health in her school. She may develop a positive attitude towards yoga and health in general. Similarly, if a child constantly falls ill because she eats junk food instead of proper meals, then the child is likely to develop a negative attitude towards junk food and also positive attitude towards eating healthy food. Learning attitudes through modeling. Often it is not through association or through reward and punishment that we learn attitudes. Instead, we learn them by observing or expressing thoughts or showing behavior of a particular kind of towards the attitude object. For example, children may form a respectful attitude towards elders by observing that their parents show respect for elders and are appreciated for it. Learning attitudes through group or cultural norms. Very often we learn attitudes through the norms of the group or culture. Norms are unwritten rules about behavior that everyone is supposed to show under specific circumstances. Over time, these norms may become part of social cognition in the form of attitudes. Learning attitudes through group or cultural norms may actually be an example of all three forms of learning described above. Learning through association, reward or punishment, and modeling. For example, offering money, sweets, fruits, and flowers in place of worship is normative behavior in some religions. When individuals see that such behavior is shown by others, is expected and socially approved, they may ultimately develop a positive attitude towards such behavior and the associated feelings of devotion. Learning through exposure to information. Many attitudes are learned in a social context, but not necessarily in the physical presence of others. Today, with a huge amount of information that is being provided through various media, both positive and negative attitudes are being formed. By reading the biographies of self-actualized persons, an individual may develop a self-attitude that is positive, hard work, and other aspects as a means of achieving success in life. Factors that affect attitude formation. The following factors provide context for learning of attitudes through processes described above. Family and school environment. Particularly in the years of life, parents and other family members play a significant role in shaping attitude formation. Later, the school environment becomes an important background for attitude formation. Learning of attitude within the family and school usually takes place by association, through rewards and punishments, and through modeling. Reference groups. indicate to an individual the norms regarding acceptable behavior and ways of thinking. Thus, they reflect learning of attitudes through group or cultural norms, attitude towards various topics such as political, religious, and social groups. Occupation, national, and other issues are often developed through reference groups. Their influence is noticeable, especially during the beginning of adolescence, at which time it is important for the individual to feel that he or she belongs to a group. Therefore, the role of reference group in attitude formation may also be a case of learning through reward and punishment. Personal experiences. Many attitudes are formed not in the family environment or through reference groups, but through direct personal experience, which bring about a drastic change in our attitude towards life, people, and our own life. Here is a real life example. A driver in the army went through personal experience that transformed his life. On one mission, he narrowly escaped death, although all his companions got killed. Wondering about his own pursuit of life, he gave up his job, returned to their native village in Maharashtra, and worked actively as a community leader. Through a purely personal experience, the individual evolved a strong positive attitude towards community upliftment. His efforts completely changed the face of the village. Media related influences. Technological advances in recent times have made audiovisual media and the internet very powerful sources of information that lead to attitude formation and change. In addition, school level textbooks also influence attitude formation. These sources first strengthen the cognitive and affective components of attitudes and subsequently may also affect the behavioral component. The media can exert both good and bad influences on attitudes. On one hand, the media and internet make people better informed than other modes of communication. On the other hand, there may be no check on the nature of information being gathered and therefore no control over the attitudes that are being formed or the direction of change in the existing of attitudes. The media can be used to create consumerist attitudes where none existed and can also be harnessed to create positive attitude to facilitate social harmony. Attitude change. During the process of attitude formation and also after this process, attitudes may be changed and modified through various influences. Some attitudes change more than others do. Attitudes that are still in the formative stage and are more like opinions are much more likely to change compared to attitudes that have become firmly established and have become a part of the individual's values. From a practical point of view, bringing about a change in people's attitude is of interest to community leaders, politicians, producers of consumer goods, advertisers, and others. Unless we find out how attitude change and what conditions account for such change, it would not be possible to take steps to bring about the attitude change. Process of attitude change. The three major concepts that draw attention to some important processes in attitude change are described below. The concept of balance proposed by Fritz Heider is sometimes described in the form of POX triangle, which represents the relationships between three aspects or components of the attitude. P is the person whose attitude is being studied, O is another person, X is the topic towards which the attitude is being studied. It is possible that all three are persons. The basic idea is that an attitude changes if there is a state of imbalance between PO attitude and OX attitude and PX attitude. This is because imbalance is logically uncomfortable. Therefore, the attitude changes in the direction of balance. Imbalance is found when all three sides of the POX triangle are negative, or two sides are positive and one is negative. Balance is found when all three sides are positive, or two sides are negative and one is positive. Consider the example of dowry as an attitude topic. Suppose a person has positive attitude towards dowry. P is the planning to get his son married to daughter of some person O who has negative attitude towards dowry. OX negative. What would be the nature of PO attitude and would it be determine balance or imbalance in the situation? If O initially has positive attitude towards P, the situation would be unbalanced. Px is positive, OP is positive, but OX is negative. That is, there are two positives and one negative in the triangle. The situation is of imbalance. One of the three attitudes will therefore have to change. This change could take place in the Px relationship. P starts disliking dowry as a custom, or in OX relationship, O starts liking dowry as a custom, or in OP relationship, O starts disliking P. In short, an attitude change will have to take place so that there will be three positive relationships or two negative and one positive relationship in the triangle. The concept of cognitive dissonance was proposed by Leon Festinger. The emphasis is on the cognitive component. Here the basic idea is that the cognitive components of an attitude must be consonant. That is, they should be logically in line with each other. If an individual finds that two cognitions in an attitude are dissonant, then one of them will be changed in the direction of consonance. For example, thinking about the following ideas. Cognition 1. Pan masala causes mouth cancer, which is fatal. Cognition 2. I eat pan masala. Holding these two ideas or cognitions will make any individual feel that something is out of tune or dissonant in the attitude towards pan masala. Therefore, one of these ideas will have to be changed so that consonance can attain. In the example given above, in order to remove or reduce the dissonance, I will stop eating pan masala. This would be healthy, logical and sensible way of reducing dissonance. Festinger or Carl Smith, two social psychologists, conducted an experiment that showed how cognitive dissonance works. Both balance and cognitive dissonance are examples of cognitive consistency. Cognitive consistency means that two components, aspects, elements of the attitude or attitude system must be in the same direction. Each element should logically fall in line with other elements. If this does not happen, then the person experiences a kind of mental discomfort. That is the sense that something is not quite right in the attitude system. In such a state, some aspect in the attitude system changes in the direction of consistency because our cognitive system requires logical consistency. The two-step concept was proposed by S.M. Mawson, an Indian psychologist. According to him, attitude change takes place in form of two steps. In the first step, the target of change identifies with the source. The target is the person whose attitude is to be changed. The source is the person through whose influence the change is to take place. Identification means the target has liking and regard for the source. She or he puts herself or himself in the place of target and tries to feel like her or him. The source must also have a positive attitude towards the target, and the regard and attraction becomes mutual. In the second step, the source herself himself shows an attitude change by actually changing her or him behavior towards the attitude object. Observing the source attitude and behavior, the target also show an attitude change through behavior. This is a kind of imitation or observational learning. Consider the following example of two-step attitude change. Preeti reads in the newspaper that a particular soft drink that she enjoys is extremely harmful, but Preeti sees that her favorite sport person has been advertising the same soft drink. She identified the person and would like to imitate her or him. Now suppose the sports person wishes to change people's attitude towards this soft drink from positive to negative. The sport person must first show how positive feelings for her or his fans, and then actually change her or her habits of consuming that soft drink, perhaps by substituting it with a health drink. If the sportsperson actually changes her behavior or his behavior, it is very likely that now Preeti will also change her attitude and behavior and stop consuming harmful soft drink. Factors that influence attitude change. Whether attitudes will change, and if so, to what extent, is a question that puzzles many psychologists. However, most of them agree upon the following major factors that influence attitude change. Characteristics of existing attitude. All four properties of attitude mentioned earlier, namely valence, extremeness, simplicity or complexity, and centrality or significance of the attitude, determine attitude change. In general, positive attitudes are easier to change than negative attitudes are. Extreme attitudes are central attitudes that are difficult to change than the less extreme. and peripheral attitudes are. Simple attitudes are easier to change than multiple attitudes are. In addition, one must also consider the direction and extent of attitude change. An attitude change may be congruent, it may change in the same direction as the existing attitude. For instance, suppose a person has somewhat positive attitude towards empowerment of women. Reading about a successful woman may make this attitude more positive. This would be a congruent change. On the other hand, an attitude change may be incongruent. It may be in a direction opposite to the existing attitude. In the example just given, after reading about successful women, a person may think that women might soon become too powerful and neglect their family responsibilities. This may make the person's existing positive attitude towards empowerment of women less positive or even negative. If this happens, then it would not be a case of incongruent change. It has been found that in general, congruent changes are easier to bring about than incongruent changes in attitudes. Moreover, an attitude may change in the direction of the information that is presented or in a direction opposite to that of the information presented. Posters describing the importance of brushing one's teeth would strengthen a positive attitude towards dental care. What if people are shown frightening pictures of dental cavities? They may not believe the pictures and may become less positive about dental care. Research has found that fear sometimes works well in convincing people, but if a message generates too much fear, it turns off the receiver and little persuasive effect. Source characteristics, source credibility and characteristiveness are two features that affect attitude change. Attitudes are more likely to change when the message comes from a highly credible source rather than a low credible source. For example, two adults who are planning to buy a laptop are more convinced by a computer engineer who points out special features of a particular brand of laptop than they would be by a school child who might give the same information. But if the buyers are themselves school children, they may be convinced more by another school child advertising a laptop than they by a professional giving the same information. In the case, some products such as car sales may not increase if they are publicized, not necessarily by experts but by popular public figures. Message characteristics. The message is the information that is presented in order to bring about the attitude change. Attitudes will change when the amount of information that is given about the topic is just enough, neither too much or not too little. Whether the message contains a rational or an emotional appeal, it also makes a difference. For example, an advertisement for cooking food in pressure cooker may point out that this is fuel and such as cooking gas and is economical. Alternatively, the advertisement may say that pressure cooking preserves nutrition and that if one cares for family nutrition would be a major concern. The motives activated by the message also determine attitude change. For example, drinking milk may be said to make a person healthy and good looking, or once more energetic and more successful at one's job. Finally, the mode of spreading the message plays a significant role. Face-to-face transmission of the message is usually more effective than indirect transmission, as for instance through letters and pamphlets or even through mass media. For example, a positive attitude towards oral rehydration salts for young children is more effectively created if community social workers and doctors spread the message by talking to people directly than by describing benefits of ORS on the radio. These days, transmission through visual media such as television and internet are similar face-to-face interaction but not a substitute for the latter. Target characteristics. Qualities of the target such as persuasibility, strong prejudices, self-esteem and intelligence influence the likelihood and sector attitude change. People who have a more open and flexible personality change more easily. Advertisers benefit most from such people. People with strong prejudices are less prone to any attitude change than those who do not hold strong prejudices. Persons who have low self-esteem and do not have self-sufficient confidence in themselves change their attitude more easily than those who have high self-esteem. More intelligent people may change their attitudes less easily than those with lower intelligence. However, sometimes more intelligent persons change their attitudes more willingly than less intelligent ones because they base their attitude on more information and thinking. Attitude behavior relationship. We usually expect behavior to follow logically from attitudes. However, an individual's attitudes may not always be exhibited through behavior. Likewise, one's actual behavior may be contrary to one's attitude towards a particular topic. Psychologists have found that there would be consistency between attitudes and behavior when the attitude is strong when occupies a central space in the attitude system. The person is aware of his or her attitude. There is very little or no external pressure for the person to behave in a particular way. For example, when there is no group pressure to follow a particular norm. The person's behavior is not being watched or evaluated by others. The person thinks that the behavior would have positive consequence and therefore interested to engage in that behavior. In the days when Americans were said to be prejudiced against the Chinese, Richard Lapierre, an American sociologist, conducted the following study. He asked a Chinese couple to travel across the United States and stay in different hotels. Only once during these occasions, they were refused service by one of the hotels. Sometimes later, Lapierre sent out questionnaires to the manager of hotels and tourist homes in the same areas where the Chinese people had traveled, asking them if they would give accommodation to Chinese guests. A large percentage said that they would not do so. This response showed a negative attitude towards the Chinese, which was inconsistent with the positive behavior that was actually shown towards the traveling Chinese people. Thus, attitudes may not always predict actual pattern of one's behavior. Sometimes it is behavior that decides the attitude. In the experiment by Festinger and Carl Smith, students who got $1 for telling others that the experiment was interesting discovered that they liked the experiment. That is, on the basis of their behavior, they concluded that their attitude towards the experiment was positive. Prejudice and discrimination. Prejudices are examples of attitudes towards a particular group. They are usually negative and in many cases based on stereotypes about the specific group. As will be discussed below in the section on social cognition, the characteristics of a specific group. All members belonging to this group are assumed to possess these characteristics. Often stereotypes consist of undesirable characteristics about the target group, and they lead to negative attitudes or prejudices towards member or specific groups. The cognitive component of prejudice is frequently accompanied by dislike or hatred. The affective component. Prejudice may also get translated into discrimination. The behavioral component, whereby people behave in a less positive way towards a particular target group compared to another group which they favor. History contains numerous examples of discrimination made on race and social class or caste. The genocide committed by the Nazis in Germany against the Jewish people is an extreme example of how prejudice can lead to hatred, discrimination, and mass killing of innocent people. Prejudices can exist without being shown in the form of discrimination. Similarly, discrimination can be shown without prejudice, yet the two go together very often. Wherever prejudice and discrimination exist, conflicts are very likely to rise between groups within the same society. Our own society has witnessed many deplorable instances of discrimination with and without prejudice based on gender, religion, community, caste, physical handicap, and illnesses such as AIDS. Moreover, in many cases, discriminatory behavior can be covered by law, but the cognitive and emotional components of prejudice are more difficult to change. Social psychologists have shown that the prejudice has one or more of the following sources. Learning. Like other attitudes, prejudices can also be learned through association, reward and punishment, observing others, group or cultural norms, and exposure to information that encourages prejudice. The family, reference groups, personal experiences, and the media may play a role in the learning of prejudices. We also learn prejudiced attitudes, may develop a prejudiced personality, and show low adjusting capacity, anxiety, and feelings of hostility against the outgroup. Strong social identity and in-group bias. Individuals who have strong sense of social identity and have a very positive attitude towards their own group boost this attitude by holding negative attitudes toward other groups. These are shown by prejudices. Scapegoating. This is a phenomenon by which the majority group places the blame on a minority group for its own social, economic, or political problems. The minority is too weak or too small in number to defend itself. Such accusations. Scapegoating is a group-based way of expressing frustration, and it often results in negative attitudes or prejudice against the weaker group. Kernel of truth concept. Sometimes people may continue to hold stereotypes because they think that, after all, there must be some truth or kernel of truth in what everyone says about the other group. Even a few examples are sufficient to support the kernel of truth idea. Self-fulfilling prophecy. In some cases, the group is the target of prejudice is itself responsible for continuing the prejudice. The target group may behave in ways that justify the prejudice, that is, confirm the negative expectations. For example, if the target group is described as dependent and therefore unable to make progress, the members of this target group may actually behave in a way that proves this description to be true. In this way, they strengthen the existing prejudice. Strategies for handling prejudice. Knowing about the causes or sources would be the first step in handling prejudice. Thus, the strategies for handling prejudice would be effective if they aim at minimizing opportunities for learning prejudices, changing such attitudes, de-emphasizing a narrow social identity based on the in-group, and discouraging the tendency towards self-fulfilling prophecy among the victims of prejudice. These can be accomplished through education and information dissemination for correcting stereotypes related to specific target groups and tackling the problem of a strong in-group bias. Increasing intergroup contact allows for direct communication, removal of mistrust between the groups, and even discovery of positive qualities in the outgroup. However, these strategies are successful only if two groups meet in cooperative rather than competitive context. Close interaction between the groups helps them to know each other better. Two groups are not different in power or status. Highlighting individual identity rather than group identity, thus weakening the importance of group as a basis of evaluating the other person. More details about social identity and intergroup conflict has been presented in the next chapter on social influence and group processes. Social cognition. Cognition refers to all those processes that deal with obtaining and processing of information. Extending the idea to the social world, the term social cognition refers to all those psychological processes that deal with the gathering and processing of information related to social objects. These include all the processes that help in understanding, explaining, and interpreting social behavior. The processing of information related to social objects, groups, people, relationships, social issues differs from the processing of information related to physical objects. People as social objects may themselves change as the cognitive process takes place. For instance, the teacher who observes a student in a school may draw conclusions about her or him that are quite different from the conclusions drawn by students. Mother who observes her or him at home. A student may show a difference in her behavior depending on who is watching, a teacher or the mother. Social cognition is guided by mental units called schemas. Attitude behavior relationship. We usually expect behavior to follow logically from attitudes. However, an individual's attitudes may not always be exhibited through behavior. Likewise, one's actual behavior may be contrary to one's attitude towards a particular topic. Psychologists have found that there would be consistency between attitudes and behavior when the attitude is strong and occupies a central space in the attitude system. The person is aware of his or her attitude. There is very little or no external pressure for the person to behave in a particular way. For example, when there is no group pressure to follow a particular norm. The person's behavior is not being watched or evaluated by others. The person thinks that the behavior would have positive consequence and therefore interested to engage in that behavior. In the days when Americans were said to be prejudiced against the Chinese, Richard Lapierre, an American sociologist, conducted the following study. He asked a Chinese couple to travel across the United States and stay in different hotels. Only once during these occasions, they were refused service by one of the hotels. Sometimes later, Lapierre sent out questionnaires to the manager of hotels and tourist homes in the same areas where the Chinese people had traveled, asking them if they would give accommodation to Chinese guests. A large percentage said that they would not do so. This response showed a negative attitude towards the Chinese, which was inconsistent with the positive behavior that was actually shown towards the traveling Chinese people. Thus, attitudes may not always predict actual pattern of one's behavior. Sometimes it is behavior that decides the attitude. In the experiment by Festinger and Carl Smith, students who got $1 for telling others that the experiment was interesting discovered that they liked the experiment. That is, on the basis of their behavior, they concluded that their attitude towards the experiment was positive. Prejudice and discrimination. Prejudices are examples of attitudes towards a particular group. They are usually negative and in many cases based on stereotypes about the specific group. As will be discussed below in the section on social cognition, the characteristics of a specific group. All members belonging to this group are assumed to possess these characteristics. Often stereotypes consist of undesirable characteristics about the target group, and they lead to negative attitudes or prejudices towards member or specific groups. The cognitive component of prejudice is frequently accompanied by dislike or hatred. The affective component, prejudice, may also get translated into discrimination. The behavioral component, whereby people behave in a less positive way towards a particular target group compared to another group which they favor. History contains numerous examples of discrimination made on race and social caste. The genocide committed by the Nazis in Germany against the Jewish people is an extreme example of how prejudice can lead to hatred, discrimination, and mass killing of innocent people. Prejudices can exist without being shown in the form of discrimination. Similarly, discrimination can be shown without prejudice. Yet the two go together very often. Wherever prejudice and discrimination exist, conflicts are very likely to rise between groups within the same society. Our own society has witnessed many deplorable instances of discrimination with and without prejudice based on gender, religion, community, caste, physical handicap, and illnesses such as AIDS. Moreover, in many cases, discriminatory behavior can be covered by law, but the cognitive and emotional components of prejudice are more difficult to change. Social psychologists have shown that the prejudice has one or more of the following sources. Learning. Like other attitudes, prejudices can also be learned through association, reward and punishment, observing others, group or cultural norms, and exposure to information that encourages prejudice. The family, reference groups, personal experiences, and the media may play a role in the learning of prejudices. We also learn prejudiced attitudes, may develop a prejudiced personality, and show low adjusting capacity, anxiety, and feelings of hostility against the outgroup. Strong social identity and in-group bias. Individuals who have strong sense of social identity and have a very positive attitude towards their own group boost this attitude by holding negative attitudes about other groups. These are shown by prejudices. Scapegoating. This is a phenomenon by which the majority group places the blame on a minority group for its own social, economic, or political problems. The minority is too weak or too small in number to defend itself. Such accusations. Scapegoating is a group based way of experiencing frustration, and it often results in negative attitudes or prejudice against the weaker group. Kernel of truth concept. Sometimes people may continue to hold stereotypes because they think that, after all, there must be some truth or kernel of truth in what everyone says about the other group. Even a few examples are sufficient to support the kernel of truth idea. Self-fulfilling prophecy. In some cases, the group is the target of prejudice is itself responsible for continuing the prejudice. The target group may behave in ways that justify the prejudice, that is, confirm the negative expectations. For example, if the target group is described as dependent and therefore unable to make progress, the members of this target group may actually behave in a way that proves this description to be true. In this way, they strengthen the existing prejudice. Strategies for handling prejudice. Knowing about the causes or sources would be the first step in handling prejudice. Thus, the strategies for handling prejudice would be effective if they aim at minimizing opportunities for learning prejudices, changing such attitudes, de-emphasizing a narrow social identity based on the in-group, and discouraging the tendency towards self-fulfilling prophecy among the victims of prejudice. These can be accomplished through education and information dissemination for correcting stereotypes related to specific target groups and tackling the problem of a strong in-group bias. Increasing intergroup contact allows for direct communication, removal of mistrust between the groups, and even discovery of positive qualities in the outgroup. However, these strategies are successful only if two groups meet in cooperative rather than competitive context. Close interaction between the groups helps them to know each other better. Two groups are not different in power or status. Highlighting individual identity rather than group identity, thus weakening the importance of group as a basis of evaluating another person. More details about social identity and intergroup conflict has been presented in the next chapter on social influence and group processes. Social cognition. Cognition refers to all those processes that deal with obtaining and processing of information. Extending the idea to the social world, the term social cognition refers to all those psychological processes that deal with the gathering and processing of information related to social objects. These include all the processes that help in understanding, explaining, and interpreting social behavior. The processing of information related to social objects, groups, people, relationships, social issues differs from the processing of information related to physical objects. People as social objects may themselves change as the cognitive process takes place. For instance, the teacher who observes a student in a school may draw conclusions about her or him that are quite different from the conclusions drawn by students. Mother who observes her or him at home. A student may show a difference in her behavior depending on who is watching, a teacher or the mother. Social cognition is guided by mental units called schemas. Schemas and stereotypes. A schema is defined as a metastructure that provides a framework, set of rules, or guidelines for processing information about any object. Schemas or schemata are the basic units stored in our memory and function as shorthand ways of processing information, thus reducing the time and mental effort required in cognition. In the case of social cognition, the basic units are social schemas. Some attitudes may also function like social schemas. We use many different schemas and come to know about them through analysis and examples. Most of the schemas are in the form of categories or classes. Schemas that function in the form of categories are called prototypes, which are the entire set of features or qualities that help us to define an object completely. In social cognition, category-based schemas that is related to a group of people are called stereotypes. These are category-based schemas that are overgeneralized, are not directly verified, and do not allow for exceptions. For example, suppose you have to define a group G. If you have never directly known or interacted with a member of this group, you will most likely use your general knowledge about the typical number of group G. To that information, you will add more likes and dislikes. If you have heard more positive things about group G, then your social schema about the whole group will be more positive than negative. On the other hand, if you have heard more negative things about group G, your social schema will be in the form of negative stereotype. The inferences that you have drawn are not a result of your logical thinking or direct experience, but you are based on preconceived ideas about a particular group. The next time you actually meet a member of group G, your impression of this person and your behavior towards her or him will be influenced by a stereotype. It was mentioned earlier that stereotypes provide fertile ground for the growth of prejudices and biases against specific groups. But prejudices can also develop without stereotypes. Impression formation explaining behavior of others through attributions. Every social interaction begins with the formation of an impression about the person we meet. Public figures and applicants appearing for job interviews are very good examples that show it is very important to make a good impression on others. To process of coming to know, a person can be broadly divided into two parts: impression formation and attribution. The person who forms the impression is called perceiver. The individual about whom the impression is formed is called the target. The perceiver gathers information or responds to a given information about the qualities of the target, organizes this information, and draws influences about the target. In attribution, the perceiver goes further and explains why the target behaved in a particular way. Attaching or assigning a cause of the target's behavior is the main idea in attribution. Often perceivers may form only an impression about the target, but if the situation requires it, they may also make attribution to the target. Impression formation and attribution are influenced by nature of formation information available to the perceiver, social schemas in the perceiver, personality characteristics of the perceiver, and situational factors. Impression formation. Following aspects have been found in impression formation. The process of impression formation consists of three sub-processes. Selection. We take into account only some bits of information about the target person. Organization. The selected information is combined in a systematic way. And inference. We draw a conclusion about what kind of person the target is. Some specific qualities influence impression formation more than other traits do. The order or sequence in which information is presented affects most the kind of impression formed. Mostly, the information presented first has a stronger effect than the information present at the end. This is called primary effect. However, if the perceiver may ask to pay attention to all the information and not merely the first information, whatever information comes out at the end may have a stronger influence. This is known as recency effect. We have a tendency to think that a target of a person who has set of quantities must also having other specific positive qualities that are associated with the first set. This is known as halo effect. For example, if we are told that the person is tidy and punctual, we are likely to think about this person must also be hardworking. Attribution of causality. After forming an impression, we often go through a process of assigning causes to a person's behavior. This is also a systematic process, as indicated by the researches done on attribution. The following aspects of attribution have been found. When we assign a cause to a person's behavior, we can broadly classify cause as being internal, something within the person, or external, something outside the person. For example, if we see a person A hitting another person B, the observer explain the hitting behavior by saying that A hit B because A is hot-tempered person, which is an internal cause, or that A hit B because B behaved in a nasty way, which is an external situational cause. When people make attribution for success and failure, the causes they give can be classified into internal or external factors and also into stable and unstable factors. Bernard Weiner suggests a classification which is shown in figure. Stable factors refer to those causes that do not change with time, while stable and unstable factors are those that do change. In making attributions, there is overall tendency for people to give greater weightage to internal or dispositional factors than to external or situational factors. This is called fundamental attribution error. This tendency is stronger in some cultures than it is in others. For instance, research shows that Indians tend to make more external attribution than Americans do. There is a difference between the attribution made for success and attribution made for failure. In general, people attribute success to internal factors such as their ability or hard work. They attribute failure to external factors such as bad luck, the difficulty on the task, and so on. A distinction is also found between the attribution of a person makes for her or his own positive and negative experiences and the attribution made for another person's positive and negative experiences. This is called actor-observer effect. For example, if you yourself get good marks in a test, you will attribute it to your own ability or hard work. Internal attribution. If you get bad marks, you will say that this day was because you were unlucky or the test was too difficult. On the other hand, if one of your classmates get good marks in the test, you will attribute success to good luck or an easy test. If the same classmate get bad marks, you like to say that his failure was because of low ability or lack of effort. The basic reason for the difference between the actor and observer roles is that people want to have a nice image of themselves as compared to others. So far in this chapter, we have highlighted the cognitive or thought-related aspects of social behavior. Let us now examine some aspects of actual behavior that can be observed from outside. Behavior in the presence of others. One of the first observations made about social behavior was that performance on a specific task is influenced by the mere presence of others. This is called social facilitation. For example, Reena is about to participate in a music contest. She is very talented, yet she is feeling very nervous about the event. If you are in Reena's place, would you perform better in front of an audience or when you are alone? As early as 1897, Norman Triplett observed that individuals show better performance in the presence of others than when they are performing the same task alone. For instance, cyclists racing with each other perform better when they cycle alone. With this, more details came to know about this phenomena. Better performance in the presence of others is because the person experiences arousal, which makes the person react in a more intense manner. This explanation was given by Zhang. The arousal is because the person feels she or he is being evaluated. Cottrell called this idea evaluation apprehension. The person will be praised if performance is good or criticized if it is bad. We wish to get praise to avoid criticism, therefore we try to perform well and avoid mistakes. The nature of the task to be performed also affects the performance in the presence of others. For example, in the case of simple or familiar task, the person is sure of performing well, and the eagerness to get praise or reward is stronger. So the individual performs better in the presence of others than he or she does when alone. In case of complex or new tasks, a person may be afraid of making mistakes. The fear of criticism or punishment is stronger, so the individual performs worse in the presence of others than he or she does when alone. In the others present are also performing the same task, this is called a situation of co-action. In this situation, there is social comparison and competition. Once again, when the task is simple or a familiar one, performance is better under co-action and when the person is alone. In short, task performance can be facilitated and improved or inhibited or worsened by the presence of others. Many other kinds of social influence have been noticed. For example, if we are working together in a group, the larger the group, the less effort each member puts in. This phenomenon is called social loafing, based on diffusion of responsibility. We'll read about social loafing in the next chapter. Diffusion of responsibility, which is often the basis of social loafing, can also be frequently seen in situations where people are expected to help. We'll look into this aspect or others factor in helping behavior in the section that follows. Pro-social behavior. Throughout the world, doing good to others and being helpful is described as a virtue. All religion teaches that we should help those who are in need. This behavior is called helping or pro-social behavior. Pro-social behavior is very similar to altruism, which means doing something or thinking about welfare of others without any self-interest. The opposite of ego, which means help. Some common examples of pro-social behaviors are sharing things, cooperating with others, helping during natural calamities, showing sympathy, doing favors to others, and making charitable donations. Pro-social behavior has the following characteristics. It must aim to benefit, to do good to another person or other persons. Be done without expecting anything in return. Be done willingly by the person and not because of any kind of pressure, and involve some difficulty or cost to the person giving help. For instance, if a rich person donates a lot of money that is obtained illegally with the idea that his or her photograph and name will appear in newspapers, this cannot be called pro-social behavior, although the donation may be good to many people. In spite of great value and importance attached to pro-social behavior, people do not show much behavior very often. Immediately after Mumbai blast, the community stepped forward to help the blast victims in any way they could. By contrast, on an earlier occasion, nobody came forward to help a girl on a moving suburban train in Mumbai when her purse was being snatched. The other passengers did nothing to help, and the girl was thrown out of the train. Even as the girl was lying injured on the railway tracks, people living in the buildings around the area did not come to help her. And the question is, under what conditions and what motives do people help others? Research on pro-social behavior has brought out several factors that about pro-social behavior. Factors influencing pro-social behavior. Pro-social behavior is based on the inborn natural tendency in human beings to help other members of their own species. This inborn tendency facilitates survival of the species. Pro-social behavior is influenced by learning. Individuals who are brought up in a family environment that sets examples of helping others emphasizes helping as a value and praises helpfulness, and showing more social behavior, pro-social behavior than individuals who are brought up in a family environment devoid of these features. Cultural factors influence pro-social behavior. Some cultures actively encourage people to help the needy and distressed. In cultures that encourage independence, individuals will show pro-social behavior because people are expected to take care of themselves and do not depend on help from others. Individuals in cultures suffering from a shortage of resources may not show a high level of pro-social behaviors. Pro-social behavior is expressed when the situation activates certain social norms that require helping others. Three norms have been mentioned in our context of pro-social behavior. The norm of social responsibility: we should help anyone who needs help without considering any other factor. The norm of reciprocity: we should help those persons who have helped us in the past. The norm of equity: we should help others whenever we find what is fair to do so. For example, many of us may feel that it is more fair to help a person who has lost all belongings in a flood than to help a person who has lost everything through gambling. Pro-social behavior is affected by expected reactions of the person who is being helped. For example, people might be unwilling to give money to a needy person because they feel the person might feel insulted or may become dependent. Pro-social behavior is more likely to be shown on individuals who have a high level of empathy, that is, the capacity to feel the distress of the person who is to be held, such as Baba Saheb, Amte, and Mother Teresa. Pro-social behavior is also more likely to be in situations that arouse empathy, such as the picture of starving children and famine. Pro-social behavior may be reduced by factors such as bad mood, being busy with one's own problem, or feeling that person to be helped is responsible for her or his own situation. Pro-social behavior may also be reduced when the number of bystanders is more than one. For example, the victim of a road accident sometimes does not get help because there are many people standing around the scene of the accident. Each person thinks that it is not her or his responsibility alone to give help, and that someone else may take the responsibility. This phenomena is called diffusion of responsibility. On the other hand, if there is only one bystander, this person is more likely to take the responsibility and actually help the victim. In this chapter, we have learned about the basic concepts of attitude and social cognition and got a glimpse of some forms of social behavior. In the next chapter, you will read about influence of groups on individuals. Summary: human beings have a need to interact with and relate to others and to explain us own as well as others' behavior. People develop attitudes or thoughts and behavioral tendencies through learning processes. Family and school influences attitude change things accordingly to the balance concept. The entire set of processes involved in understanding the social world around us is called social cognition. Impression formation takes place in a systematic way and exhibits effects such as primary and recency and the halo effect. People also assign causes to their own others' behavior and to experience such causes as success and failure by attributing internal or external causes. Because of arousal and evaluation apprehension in the presence of others, performance of familiar tasks may improve. People respond to others who are in need by helping them, but this is determined by several factors.